Chapter 15. The Jewel of a Cat's Eye. It rained on that, her most hated day, but Red was kept dry by the thick vegetation of the forests that led away from White's castle to the coast. For the first time in her life, however, she had to feel the chill, nay, the unrelenting cold, of what it was like to be ordinary. She was leaving Wonderland's sight with her head held as high as it could be, taking with her the title that was worth less than a pig's wart, and the goal to elevate it far beyond the scope of its demagogue. But she had to admit to herself that she felt lost, weak, and incapable of delivering it without a plan or sense of direction. The solitary thing she controlled was her ability to walk, and she did it passionately, screaming obscenities at every bit of foliage she passed, as if expecting an answer to spring back at her. Well, yell the right thing to a particular tree, and I guess it will. You know, if you're going to have such spirited conversations with yourself, you should be more considerate of the other creatures who share these woods. The space between some branches critiqued, rising above the gentle static of rainfall. Startled, but well on her guard, Red reacted paranoidally, scanning the limbs above her level. Who said that? A productive question to ask. Kills two birds with a single stone, the voice hummed smoothly, because who I am is also what I am. So if I am what I am, who am I? A Cheshire cat, she answered empathetically, aware of the animal's love of trickery and thus seeing through it. Rather than being disappointed by her refusal to play, he seemed delighted when revealing his full figure, lounging on his side and using the curvature of the tree like a hammock. You're familiar? From my literature, she replied. Cheshire cat, characterized by their mischievous smiles and their ability to both and disappear at their leisure. Size ranges somewhere between a typical domesticated feline and their distant cousin, the bandersnatch. It should be said that while the fur of all three warms the skin no differently, a Cheshire cat's holds the distinction of rarity, since this is the first I've seen. Duly noted, said the cat, rolling onto his stomach with his paws propping up his chin. And I confess that my being sprawled out in front of your fireplace would be no detrimental leap toward the extinction of my species, but I insist that you abstain from your easily leaned-on tendency of violence just a minute longer. I may not be the only Cheshire cat, but I can be the most important, the most valuable to you. Oh, really? And why do you say that? She scoffed. Well, I couldn't help, or maybe it'd be more accurate to say I was forced to overhear your little dilemma, and I may have a solution to give. How could you shine a light on this dark hour and help me? She disputed mockingly, with a simple question. What does a queen need to be a queen, do you suppose? What kind of stupid game is this? She snubbed testily. Chesh grunted an interruption, sticking up a disciplinary toe whilst coaching. Best not to answer one question with another, and don't overthink it. I don't know, cat, she whined, not wanting to be burdened with the hassle. A noble birth or a unanimous public vote? Technically correct, and that's the one thing they can't strip from you, he reinforced. But we want things that pertain to your situation specifically, things that can be reattained. In army? She rebounded without pause. Warmer, but much like any other phase of your plan. That'll take time to pull together. Start at square one. A castle? She submitted as her final guest. Ah, you may be onto something there, he praised, nodding thirstily. Oh good, I'm onto something, she repeated, letting her sarcastic tone show her skepticism. And where, pray tell, do you suggest I'd find one of those lying around? Nowhere, if you're limited to finding one that currently sits empty. But if you were to widen your search to, say, occupied castles that could be taken for oneself. Take a castle? The two of us? That's asinine. You've obviously flipped your... Red wanted to laugh this four-legged jester off hysterically, but couldn't, as what he was subliminally telling her, sharing with her, suddenly hit and began sinking in. Wait. You know, don't you? About the black royalty. Chesh hummed through the trademark grin, his yellow eyes brightening. He neglected the topic formally, but the way he rubbed his paws together registered as admission enough. I wonder what the Duchess is up to nowadays. The poor dear was thrown out of political relevance when the other members of the council died, and your sister chose independence over her. As we speak, she sits in the castle all alone, with no reason to own it, and here you are, with a need that puts it to better use. Not to mention discarding her, leaving her there would be wicked, if it wasn't something she deserved, would it not? The Duchess's home sat atop a small mountain that would have gone unnamed if it hadn't been for the locals who referred to it literally as the Mount in the Middle. Unlike those in the kingdom she separated, hers was a modest, cozy castle. She often called it Arse Nymphae, or the Castle of the Nymph, for the cottage by the river feeling it gave, being a natural match to the peaceful environment of the mountain. Inside was as you'd expect from a description like that. The central room was big, but not large, and certainly not as luxurious as that of the royals above her. Without need for things like a dungeon, multiple floors, and confusing hallways, there weren't any. There weren't thrones to speak of either. She had her place to sit right beside the Duke's, who, might I add, at this point, was a growing, yet no less verbal child. Now, perhaps the most prominent feature in the room was the fireplace that functioned as its main source of heat and light when needed. To set the scene, the gloomy weather of Red's departure was persisting, and the duo was huddled on a couch supervising their frog servant struggle to light it in the dark. "Mother, can't you make him hurry? I'm getting cold and frightened," said the Duke, looking up from her bosom. "Shh, now. If you disrupt his concentration, it will only take longer," she replied with a gentle shake to remind the boy of his manners. "It's just rain, my darling. Nothing to be afraid of." That solved it. But the servant's slog toward a spark only progressed by a minute more's work, when an unexpected booming knock rang throughout the room and petrified the three. "Sanctuary, sanctuary," an exhausted-sounding feminine voice cried out against the door, fighting desperately to be noticed over the storm. Their transfixion on the entrance was broken by the frog servant asking in a low, grovelly croak, "Shall I answer the door, ma'am?" "No, I'll get it," she replied, returning to the present herself. "You just stay put and focused on what you're doing." Hearing motion, the guest outside increased her distress, hoping to play or tug on the sympathies of the lady of the house. "Sanctuary, please, for an unlucky traveler caught in this ravenous flood." The Duchess unlatched the weighty door and pulled it open, assuming she'd see a pathetic-looking waterlogged woman waiting on her step. As she moved to extend the invitation for shelter, however, she realized there was nothing but the expiring remnants of the woman's cackling there to accept it. "Who is it, mother?" inquired the Duke, bringing his knees onto the couch and bracing behind its arm. Extremely unnerved, but afraid her son might sense it, the Duchess selected a fractured root of honesty to deceive him. "There's no one here, darling. Probably just kids. You know how they are with their practical jokes." She gave a crooked smile, wishing for it to distract from her shaking legs and her heart, which was pounding through her back as she pushed the door shut. "Yes, from everything you've told me, but I'd like very much to experience them in person," he conveyed, stretching out from hunch and hiding. Nearly melting into her relief, she walked away, depending on gravity to finish closing it. "And perhaps someday you will, and they will get to know their Duke. But for he that was just complaining about being cold, muck and filth would do no favour." One step with the right, another with the left, and thud, the door swung open and took her with it, throwing her down viciously. It took but a heartbeat for the servant to react, grabbing a fire poker in defense of his mistress. However, within the same second that the Duke witnessed him lunging at the shadowy mass that floated into the room, he also watched it jump too. The punch was plenty enough to incapacitate the frog, and before he even landed flat on his back, the mass grew legs and a torso. It was now a woman, flinging him by the collar into the Duke's chair, sending both he and the pieces skidding in a heap across the floor to the far wall. The damp, long-haired Gorgon then brought her stony gaze to the couch, the child stranded on it. To put it creatively, the hare tried to outrun the wolf, but couldn't outsmart her. He put up a courageous fight, and did his all to make it difficult. But from his unconscious mother, he was dragged away to her den, pleading and screaming. A sudden commotion returned the Duchess to the there and then. Periodically, she zoned in to see a battalion of frog knights swarm the room, making it feel claustrophobic as they crowded around her in a protective formation. Her vision slowly corrected, looking up at the ceiling and the guards standing over her, needing to adjust to the throbbing in her head and the glare of the inferno residing in the fireplace. She had to squint, but was able to recognize the kind arm being offered to help her to her feet. "Release the boy," she heard an unlocated guard order. It was the woman's voice that replied, originating from the Duchess's seat of power, staring down the array of pointed weapons drawn at her. Oh, this little love is no prisoner of mine. We're just getting to know each other better. This is your last warning, another trooper threatened. The mistress's dizziness stabilized, and her blurriness focused, while she rifled her way through the mob. Reaching the front, she stepped out onto her own, ready to meet the one who had invaded her home. What she was not ready for was knowing her by the green eyes, rose lips, and, least of all, her name. Red, you can't be here. Well, that's not very hospitable of you. You've only just invited an old acquaintance in, and you're eager to throw her back out into the storm so soon, she asked, feigning shock and disapproval. I mean in Wonderland, the Duchess revised stoutly. Ah, your mumsy is so excited by my visit that she's forgotten how this ruin of hers is nestled nicely between both kingdoms, Red remarked to the Duke on her lap, forcing him to take a visibly unwelcomed hug. Do you know what that means for me? No, ma'am, he answered, quivering beneath her hands, but trying to appear strong for all who were watching. Casually dabbing the tears away with her fingers, from the hand that wasn't securing him, she delineated. It means that as long as I'm here with you, darling, I'm in no violation of my banishment. Please be sensible, I promise you. Whatever you've come here to do, harming my son won't accomplish it. Duchess imposed, demonstrating decorum by indicating that the trained weapons be taken off of her. If you hurt him, the Queen will... What will the Queen do? Red blurted arrogantly, causing the child to exclaim in fear. You mean exactly what she did for her advisors, her other family friends? I think if I were to put your heads on pikes and plant them at the base of this mountain, she'd avenge your deaths passively. She'd mourn from her throne, praying ever harder that I repent and return home to her side. You see, what makes these negotiations so dangerous for you isn't me. It's the fact that whatever I decide to do will go without consequence. You've referred to this as a negotiation. Then let's discuss, she instituted angelically, gulping as she made her inquiry. What is it you desire, Red? The sum which you've so gluttonously clung to, long after having purpose for it. I want you to surrender to my siege and leave your Arce Nymphae to me. The Duke's eyes told a vivid story of objection, but his mother had to brush him aside in order to understand the benefit of the trade. If I accept this price, then I get my baby and no one dies? My terms, Red hissed, in agreement. Done, she finalized softly, turning to the frog, who apparently held the highest station, to deliver a companion command. We'll take with us only what we can carry and make way to the Queen until other accommodations can be arranged. My second stipulation, the Ruby One revisited, still holding the boy for ransom. Your amphibious militia is to stay with me as well. But they're not property like the castle or the mountain. They are servants, but they're also living creatures and our friends. I can't. We'll do it, the lead frog volunteered, speaking on behalf of the regiment. We will stay and serve the new lady of the house. Titillated by their dread, Red relinquished the boy, saying, Then, Duchess, you and this handsome lad of yours may go in peace. As the Duke ran to his mother's supportive embrace, his captor trailed off, following her snatched attention to a rustling in the corner of the room. It was the servant who had been lying there all that while, trying to recuperate some sense and pick himself up. Had it still been dark, the audience might have missed his wound. A stained shirt around wood, an awkward landing on unfortunate debris. Dutch S, he whispered, the stabbing pain keeping it breathy and broken. It couldn't be read exactly whether Red was angry she hadn't killed him, or relished getting to. But there was no wasted motion in going to him. Help me, he groaned, teetering against her. Shh, I will, oh, I will, she whispered. She whispered her words of solace before cutting a line across his neck. The blood splatter painted the wall, and the Duchess let out a loud yelp, which she anticipated would inspire the guards to advance on her. So, thinking quickly, she took the splinter from the frog's abdomen as he crumpled and kept them at bay. As new owner of every thing and every one under this roof, it is my prerogative to decide how it is to be redecorated, and I'm partial to red. Thwack! The sound of the wood hitting and rolling across the floor as she discarded it carelessly, paying it no mind after that. A hush fell upon the room, as its resonance was much heftier than they expected, making the group stand a little straighter. As silent as the guards were, so intently waiting for Red's follow-up movement, even quieter was the stem-like appendages that dropped down behind each of them. All at once, every amphibian in the room felt a sting as the bladed tips of said stems dug deep into their spines, hoisting them upward. For those unlucky enough to have the time, they saw what had ensnared them. They were horrified to learn that they were rocketing toward an elephantine flora kraken, the roaring thorny maw of a carnivorous rose. Thankfully, if you can even say that, the victims were connected to the secondary function of the Leviathan, wrapped in the tongues of the Venus flytrap pods, waiting to cocoon them in their leaves. The noises of pandemonium and dolor soon developed into the squish and liquefaction of being devoured. This harvest produced a waterfall of blood that washed over anything material. The only thing louder than the flow was the childish giggles of Red, who was dancing and twirling in the pouring. Congruently, Duchess stood utterly traumatized, comatose with shock. She was repeatedly droning some hollow words of advice over the Duke's wailing so hard he was gagging himself. "Don't open your eyes, darling. Don't turn around. Don't look." When the accumulation stopped, Red's play left her in a condition resembling a drunken stupor. Stumbling to them, she innocently pecked the boy, but gave his mother a more intimate kiss on the lips. With a taste of fresh copper and salt from their tears on hers, she said, "Off you go then. Flee to my sister. Tell her what I've done here, and see how well your queen cares for you, with another piece of her heart broken." Thus the chapter of the Duchess and the nightmarish massacre at Arce Nymphae came to a close with the door. But in turning from it, Red was faced with the disapproval of her companion, who had apparently been waiting out the whole charade, curled invisibly under her seat. "You didn't tell me this was your idea." "Hard to share what I didn't know myself," she snarked. "It all worked out according to plan, though." "Has it?" Chesh judged. "I expected you to kill them. Was it wise to let them live?" Chuckling, Red walked around him to get to her chair. "The life I allowed them to keep is a curse worse than death." "Are you honestly not the least bit concerned your sister will come for you after the report they'll bring?" he pressed, a touch dumbfounded. "Frankly, Cat, with the guests I've sent, I'm doubtful she'll have the time," she again remarked dismissively, reclining in her new furniture. "But if it makes you feel better, building our army is the next priority. My experiment failed, so I suppose we'll need another batch of frogs." Taking inventory of the mess and monstrosities she was able to conjure in what she was labeling a failure, he shuddered to think what her magic was meant to do in this situation. To that end, may I say that despite how you may value yourself after everything that's happened, I'm not the only loyalist you have. Give me time to find them, and I will fill this room with believers ready to worship and sacrifice for their queen. Chapter 16. Castles made of sand, kingdoms made of salt. From here, we know how the Red Queen's story concluded, that her death was an event to be celebrated, and Alan was the hero exalted for the deed. But what we don't know is, when his wish to return home was granted, and the festivities came to an end, White was left there, deserted by all but her bereavement. No one told you how she went out into the evening, strolling the battlefield in search of her sister, or that when she retrieved the body, no man was courageous enough to look her in the eye as she passed, making the lonesome trek back to the castle, carrying the deceased in her arms. Dispensing a marble table to lay her in the middle of itself, the throne room became the bearer of secrets and emotions for the queen in the confidence of privacy. This is how you come home. This is what marks the day that I stop planting flowers in your fields. This is the nearest we've stood to one another in years, able to touch, but you've gone cold. And yet, as I gaze upon your face, there is a look of peace, absolute fulfillment. I want to wonder how or why this could be, but no, I don't have to. Because I've realized, dear sister, that this was exactly what you wanted, to die. And the game you played was to ensure that when this day came, you'd be the last for me to lose. This was never about reclaiming the power of our family legacy. Your true retribution was in leaving me with it. And so I take it, I possess it. But what have I won? Just a castle made of sand and a kingdom made of salt. It's all worthless without you. But you knew that, and I'll bet you're happy to see me feel as you did, empty, even with the world in my hands. I think the worst is that you've made me the last of us. You've made these hands the last to mold it, my shoulders the last of our line to lift it up, so I can't give it away. If this was the real intent behind your war, then forgive me. My people celebrate falsely. Then I am your casualty, and it is you, Red, the Red Queen, the prime evil they've condemned you to be, who have prevailed. That's going to wrap up this episode, guys. A little bit longer one, but we fit 2 chapters in there, so we're moving along just fine. And I hope you enjoyed it and are looking forward to our final 8 chapters in the 3rd part of Wonderhaven. Until next time, guys, we'll see you there.